The sun hung like a blazing copper coin in the merciless New Mexico sky, its heat shimmering off the desert floor in waves that made the distant mesas dance like mirages. Jake, Ryder McMahon, guided his sorrel gelding through the maze of sage and prickly pear with the automatic precision of a man who had spent more years reading the language of the high desert than he cared to count. The silence stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by the rhythmic creak of leather and the soft whisper of wind through the countless canyons that scored this ancient land. Jake preferred the solitude, had sought it out after too many years of other people's wars and other people's expectations. Out here a man answered only to himself and the unforgiving elements, living or dying by choices that were his own to make. The desert asked no questions about a man's past, offered no judgment about the ghosts that followed him across these endless spaces. But the cry that reached his ears shattered that carefully constructed peace like gunshot in a cathedral. It was thin and desperate, the sound of something small and utterly helpless, calling out against the vast indifference of the wilderness. Jake reined in his horse and listened, his weathered features sharpening with instinctive alertness. The cry came again, carried on the hot wind like a prayer torn from desperate lips, and Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach despite the brutal heat. He had heard that sound before, in places where civilization showed its ugliest face and hope went to die. Common sense whispered that a smart man would turn his horse around and ride away, would mind his own business and let the desert keep its secrets. But Jake had long ago stopped listening to the voice of common sense when it came to matters of conscience. He touched his heels to the gelding's flanks and followed the sound toward whatever waited in the shimmering heat. What he found was a scene from a fever dream painted in blood and dust. A small wagon sat tilted at a crazy angle in a shallow arroyo, its canvas top shredded by wind and violence, its wooden sides pocked with the telltale scars of rifle fire. The team was gone, either dead or scattered, leaving the wagon stranded like a broken toy in the merciless landscape. Buzzards wheeled overhead with patient hunger, their shadows moving across the ground in lazy circles. Jake dismounted slowly, his hand moving instinctively to the colt that rode his right hip. He had seen enough battlefields to recognize the aftermath of violence, but this felt different somehow. Too clean, too purposeful, as if whoever had done this had accomplished exactly what they set out to do and then vanished back into the vastness like smoke on the wind. The bodies lay scattered around the wagon with the terrible stillness of the truly dead. A man and woman, dressed in the simple clothes of homesteaders, heading west with dreams bigger than their water barrels. The man had died quickly, a single bullet to the head. The woman had not been so fortunate, her torn clothing and unnatural position telling a story that Jake did not want to read, but understood with sickening clarity. The crying came again, weaker now but still persistent, and Jake traced it to the wagon itself. He climbed up carefully and peered into the shadowed interior that reeked of fear and death, and something else that might have been hope dying slowly in the desert heat. There, wedged between a water barrel and a sack of cornmeal, was a bundle of blankets that moved with the rhythm of small, desperate breathing. Jake reached for the bundle with hands that trembled despite his best efforts to keep them steady. The blankets fell away to reveal a baby, perhaps 8 months old, its face red with crying and heat, its small fists waving frantically at the air. It was a girl, Jake could see, with dark hair and skin that spoke of mixed heritage. Apache, most likely, though raised by whites if the fine quality of her swaddling clothes meant anything. The baby's eyes found Jake's face, and the crying stopped, replaced by a look of such desperate hope and trust that Jake felt his heart crack like dried leather in the sun. Here was a child who'd been calling for help with the only voice she possessed, trusting that somewhere, in this vast and hostile world, someone would hear and answer. "Easy there, little one," Jake whispered, his voice rusty from days of disuse. "You're safe now." He lifted the baby carefully, surprised by how light she was, how fragile. In his arms, she felt like a collection of bird bones, held together by sheer determination, her small body radiating heat like a tiny furnace. Jake checked her for injuries and found none, though she was clearly dehydrated and exhausted. Looking around the wagon, Jake found a canteen still half full of water and some hardtack wrapped in oiled cloth. He wet a corner of the baby's blanket and let her suck on it, watching as her small face relaxed with relief. As he cradled the baby, Jake tried to piece together what had happened here. The attack had been recent, but there was something staged about the scene that made his skin crawl. The bodies were positioned too carefully, the wagon searched too thoroughly. This had not been random violence or simple robbery. This had been execution, carried out with cold efficiency. "What am I going to do with you, little bit?" Jake asked softly, though he already knew the answer in his heart. A half-Apache baby in this territory was a death sentence waiting to happen. The reservations were overflowing with children torn from their families, and the towns were full of men who saw native blood as something to be eliminated rather than protected. But looking into those trusting eyes, Jake found that the choice had already been made. Some decisions came from the head, calculated and careful. Others came from a deeper place, where the heart made promises that the mind had to figure out how to keep. "Guess you're coming home with me," Jake said, tucking the baby more securely into his arms. The ride back to his homestead passed in a blur of heat and worry, and a strange kind of joy that Jake had not felt in longer than he could remember. His cabin sat in a hidden valley surrounded by red rock walls, a modest structure of pine logs and adobe that he had built with his own hands after the war ended. It was isolated, tucked away from the main trails, where curious eyes might ask questions he would not be able to answer. Inside, Jake had never felt the emptiness of the place more keenly than he did now, carrying a baby who would need warmth and care. He set the baby down gently on his own bed, surrounding her with pillows, then began the awkward process of figuring out how to care for an infant. Jake had learned improvisation during his years in the cavalry, when making do was often the difference between living and dying. He tore up one of his cleaner shirts to make fresh diapers, heated water on the wood stove, and mashed up some hardtack with warm water to make a paste he could feed her with his finger. As the sun began to set, painting the cabin walls in shades of gold and crimson, Jake found himself sitting by the fire with the baby in his arms, trying to coax her toward sleep. "You need a name, little bit," Jake said quietly. "You look like a Sarah to me. Good, strong name. Belonged to my grandmother back in Tennessee." The name seemed to fit, and Jake found himself repeating it softly as he rocked the baby towards sleep. Sarah, his daughter now, by choice, if not by blood, by love, if not by law. It was full dark when the first shadow moved outside the window. Jake saw it from the corner of his eye, a shape that did not belong among the familiar silhouettes of his homestead. He continued rocking the baby, but his free hand moved slowly toward the rifle that leaned against the wall. Another shadow moved, then another, flowing across the yard with the fluid grace of men who had been born to this land and knew how to move across it without disturbing so much as a pebble. They were being surrounded. Jake felt his pulse quicken, but he forced himself to remain calm. Sarah had finally fallen asleep in his arms, her small face peaceful in the firelight, and he would not wake her with sudden movements or signs of fear. Whatever was happening outside, the baby did not need to be afraid. A soft scratching at the door made Jake's blood turn to ice. Not knocking, not the aggressive demand of soldiers or outlaws, but the careful request of someone who sought permission rather than simply taking what they wanted by force. "Who's there?" he called quietly. The answer came in accented English, spoken with careful pronunciation. "We come in peace, white man. We wish to speak with you." Jake hesitated, his mind racing through possibilities. Apache certainly, though he could not tell how many or what they wanted. They could have killed him already if that had been their intention. Instead, they asked permission, which suggested either respect or negotiation. "I'm armed," Jake said, though he made no move toward his weapons. As are we, came the reply, touched with what might have been gentle amusement. Yet we do not come for war tonight. We come for the child you carry. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Of course they knew about Sarah. Apache scouts could track a whisper across solid rock, could read signs that other men would never notice. They had probably been watching since he found the wagon. The child is under my protection, Jake said, his voice steady despite the fear that clawed at his throat. We know this, the voice replied, with what sounded like approval. That is why we wish to speak with you face to face. Jake looked down at Sarah, sleeping peacefully against his chest, unaware that her entire future was being decided in whispered conversations through a wooden door. Some decisions came from the head, Jake reminded himself. Others came from the heart. And sometimes, when the stakes were high enough, a man had to trust that doing the right thing would somehow work out in the end. He opened the door. The man who stood on his threshold was ancient, his face mapped with lines that spoke of decades spent under the merciless desert sun. He wore traditional Apache clothing, buckskin and beadwork, that caught the firelight like captured stars, but his bearing was unmistakably that of someone accustomed to command. Behind him, Jake could glimpse other figures in the darkness, shadows that suggested a force large enough to overwhelm any resistance. I am Many Horses, the old man said simply, as if the name should explain everything. Jake felt his knees go weak with recognition. Many Horses. The war chief, whose very name had struck terror into the hearts of settlers and soldiers alike for more than 2 decades. And he was standing on Jake's porch, asking politely for permission to enter. I know who you are, Jake managed to say. Many Horses nodded, his dark eyes studying Jake with the intensity of someone who could read character the way other men read newspapers. And I know who you are, Jake McMahon, former sergeant, 5th Cavalry Regiment, a man who has fought my people in battle, yet who rides alone now and harms no one who does not threaten him first. The words carried weight and judgment, but also something else that Jake had not expected, respect perhaps, or at least acknowledgement of his attempt to live peacefully. Jake stepped aside, allowing the war chief to enter his cabin, and was surprised when only one other man followed. The rest remained outside, invisible guardians in the darkness. Many Horses moved through the small space with quiet dignity, his eyes taking in every detail. When his gaze fell on Sarah, sleeping in Jake's arms, his weathered features softened with an expression that was purely grandfatherly. The child is well, he observed with satisfaction. She's fine, Jake replied. Scared and thirsty when I found her, but no real harm done. You found her at the burned wagon. It was not a question, and Jake did not bother to deny what they both knew to be true. Her parents were dead. I couldn't just leave her there. Many Horses studied him for a long moment, then spoke to his companion in rapid Apache. When the war chief turned back to Jake, his expression held layers of meaning. The child's name was Elena, Many Horses said. Her mother was Rosa Delgado, daughter of a Mexican vaquero. Her father was Thomas Bradford, a trader from Colorado. But her blood— The old man paused, his eyes finding Jake's face. Her blood carries the line of my youngest sister's daughter. Jake felt the world shift beneath his feet. She's your family. Great niece, Many Horses confirmed. My sister married a Mexican rancher 15 years ago. Their daughter took a white husband, and together they tried to build a life that belonged to all worlds and none. They thought that by raising the child in the white man's way, they could protect her from the hatred that follows Apache blood like a curse. The pain in the old man's voice was unmistakable. Jake looked down at Sarah, seeing her with new eyes. Not just a lost baby, but a living bridge between worlds that seemed determined to destroy each other. They were wrong, Jake said quietly. Yes, Many Horses agreed with bitter sadness. The men who killed them cared nothing for the child's white name or Christian baptism. They saw only Apache features and decided the world would be better off without another half-breed. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy with implications that made Jake's stomach turn. "Why didn't you stop them?" Jake asked. Many Horses' face hardened like stone. "We were not there when it happened. By the time our scouts brought word of the smoke, it was too late for the parents. But not for the child." His eyes found Jake's again. "You saved her when we could not. That creates a debt that must be acknowledged." Jake shifted Sarah carefully. "I don't want payment for doing what any decent person would do." "Decent people," Many Horses repeated, as if tasting the words and finding them bitter. "How many decent people do you think passed that wagon before you arrived? How many saw the smoke and chose to ride the other way rather than involve themselves in someone else's troubles?" The question cut deep because Jake knew the answer. In this territory, minding your own business was not just common sense, it was survival. "I just couldn't leave her," Jake said simply. Something shifted in Many Horses' expression, a subtle change that might have been approval. "You would fight for her? Against my warriors? Against your own people if necessary?" "If it came to that, yes." The old man was quiet for a long moment, studying Jake with eyes that seemed to see through flesh and bone to the truth beneath. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made the air in the cabin feel thick and charged. "There is another path we might walk together." Jake waited, hardly daring to breathe. "You keep the child," Many Horses continued slowly. "Raise her as your daughter. Teach her the white man's ways, but also teach her pride in all her blood, respect for all her heritage, and know that in doing this, you do not walk alone." "I don't understand what you're offering." Many Horses moved to the window, gesturing toward the darkness outside. "How many warriors do you think surround this cabin tonight?" Jake tried to count the movements he had glimpsed. 30, maybe 40, 200, Many Horses said simply. "Every fighting man from 3 different bands, plus scouts from as far away as the Dragoon Mountains. Word travels quickly in the desert, especially word of a white man who would risk everything for an Apache child." The magnitude of what he was hearing hit Jake like a physical blow. 200 warriors, enough to hold off an entire regiment if necessary, all of them gathered around his hidden valley, all of them waiting to learn the outcome of this conversation. "They came to take her back?" Jake asked, though his arms tightened protectively around Sarah. "They came to decide her fate," Many Horses corrected gently. "Some wanted to take her back to the reservation, raise her Apache. Others wanted to leave her with you, let her grow up white and safe from the wars consuming our people. But I convinced them there was a third possibility, which is..." Many Horses turned back to face him. "You become family, not just to the child, but to all of us. Your home becomes sacred ground that none may violate. Your word becomes our bond. Your enemies become our enemies, and our protection becomes your shield against all harm." Jake felt the weight of the offer settling on his shoulders. To accept would mean giving up any pretense of neutrality, any chance of living quietly on the margins of the conflict that raged across the territory. But looking down at Sarah, still sleeping peacefully in his arms, Jake realized that the choice had already been made. He had crossed that line the moment he decided to bring her home. "What would that mean exactly?" he asked. "It means that when you ride into town with the child, Apache eyes watch for trouble from the shadows. When soldiers come asking uncomfortable questions, Apache ears hear their plans before they reach your door. When winter comes and supplies run low, Apache hands share what they have." Many Horses paused. "And it means that when the child is old enough to ask questions about where she came from, Apache voices will be there to give her true answers." The vision that painted itself in Jake's mind was both terrifying and wonderful. Sarah growing up knowing both worlds, proud of both sides of her heritage and belonging fully to each. "And in return?" he asked. "You raise her well. You teach her honor and courage and respect for all life. You show her that love is stronger than hatred, that family is chosen as often as it is born." Many Horses' eyes were steady on Jake's face. "And when the time comes for her to choose her own path in this world, you let her go, even if that path leads away from everything you have built together." The last part hit Jake like a knife between the ribs. The idea of losing Sarah was almost unbearable. But Jake understood the wisdom embedded in the demand, the recognition that true love sometimes meant letting go of what you treasured most. "If I agree to this," Jake said slowly, "what happens to the men who killed her parents?" Many Horses' expression did not change, but something cold flickered in his dark eyes. "Justice will be done. Not the white man's justice that sees only the color of skin, but true justice that weighs hearts and actions. Those who killed innocents for sport will answer for their crimes." Jake nodded, understanding that some debts could only be paid in blood. "I accept," Jake said quietly. Many Horses smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "Then it is done. From this night forward, you are brother to the Apache people. Your daughter is our daughter. Your home is sacred ground that none may violate without facing our wrath." The old man moved to the door and spoke softly in his native language. The response came from multiple voices, a chorus of agreement that seemed to rise from the very earth around the cabin. Jake felt the sound wash over him like a blessing. Many Horses returned to where Jake stood, reaching into a leather pouch at his side. From it, he withdrew a small object that gleamed in the firelight. A silver amulet shaped like a bear paw, its surface engraved with symbols that seemed to dance in the flickering light. "This belonged to my sister," he said, placing it gently around Sarah's neck. "It will protect her from harm and remind her of the blood that flows in her veins. When she is old enough to understand its meaning, tell her that she carries the blessing of many Horses and the love of her people." Jake touched the amulet gently, feeling its weight and warmth. "I will tell her." There will be a ceremony 7 days from tonight," Many Horses said. "A naming ceremony to welcome the child formally into the tribe and to mark your acceptance as family. You will bring her, and you will participate according to our traditions." "I'll be there," Jake promised without hesitation. Many Horses nodded, then moved toward the door. "Sleep well, brother. Tomorrow begins a new chapter in all our lives." After the war chief left, Jake stood in his doorway and watched as the shadows melted away into the night. One by one, the warriors who had surrounded his cabin faded back into the darkness, leaving no trace except the memory of voices raised in acceptance. Inside his cabin, Sarah slept on in perfect peace, unaware that her future had been transformed by words spoken in the darkness. Jake settled back into his chair by the fire and watched her breathing, trying to process everything that had happened. In 12 hours, he had gone from being a solitary rancher to being the father of an Apache child and the adopted brother of an entire people. But as he looked down at Sarah's sleeping face, Jake felt something he had not experienced in years: purpose. "Well, little bit," he whispered to the sleeping baby, "looks like we're about to find out what we're really made of." The ceremony, when it came, was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Held in a sacred canyon where ancient pictographs covered the walls, like prayers carved in living stone, it brought together members of 5 different bands in a celebration of life and continuity. Jake felt awkward at first, a white man among people who had every historical reason to distrust his kind. But as the evening progressed, as Sarah was passed from hand to hand and blessed by elders who spoke words in languages older than the oldest books, Jake began to understand that he was witnessing something truly sacred. When the time came for him to speak, to formally accept the role of father and brother that had been offered to him, Jake spoke simply and from the heart. "I don't know if I'm wise enough or strong enough to be the father this child deserves," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the canyon's acoustics. "But I know I love her more than my own life, and I'll fight anyone or anything that tries to hurt her. That's all I can promise, but I promise it with everything I am." "Adieu." The response was a thunderous chorus of approval that echoed off the canyon walls. Later, Many Horses approached Jake with something that might have been paternal pride shining in his ancient eyes. "Love is the beginning of wisdom," the old war chief said quietly. "Everything else can be learned along the way." Years passed. Sarah grew from a baby into a child who could ride before she could properly walk, and who spoke Apache as fluently as English. Jake watched her navigate between worlds with unconscious grace, and felt his heart swell with pride. There were challenges, of course. Townspeople who whispered about the Apache girl and her white father. Soldiers who asked pointed questions about Jake's loyalties. But there were also unexpected allies, and always there were the Watchers in the shadows, Apache scouts who ensured that threats were identified before they became dangerous. The girl thrived, growing strong and confident. She learned to track and hunt from Apache warriors, to read and write from Jake, to heal with plants from the medicine women. Most importantly, she learned that family was something you built rather than something you were born into. On Sarah's 13th birthday, Jake woke to find many horses sitting on his porch, watching the sunrise. The old war chief looked older, his hair now completely white. "You've done well," many horses said without preamble. "She's a good girl," Jake replied, settling beside him. "She's a bridge," many horses corrected, "between what was and what might be, between peoples who have forgotten how to see each other as human." They watched Sarah emerge from the cabin and begin her morning chores. She had grown tall, her features a perfect blend of her mixed heritage. "There will be changes coming," many horses said eventually. "The old ways are ending. Soon there will be no more Apache warriors hiding in the mountains. Only Apache people trying to find a place in a world that was not made for them. And Sarah? Sarah will have choices we never had. She can build bridges or burn them, depending on what her heart tells her is right. But first, she must understand what she's choosing between." The conversation Jake had been dreading for years had finally arrived. When the summer ceremonies began, Sarah would undergo her passage into womanhood according to Apache traditions. She would spend months with the tribe, learning what it truly meant to be Apache. That evening, Jake sat Sarah down for the conversation he had been avoiding. They talked long into the night, about heritage and identity, about the choices that would shape the rest of her life. "I need to do this, Papa," she said, using the name she had called him since she first learned to speak. "I need to know who I am when I'm not standing in your shadow, even though it's the best shadow I could ever hope to stand in." Jake felt tears prick his eyes. "I know you do, little bit. Doesn't make it any easier to let you go." Sarah moved to sit beside him. "You're not losing me, Papa. You're giving me the gift of choice. That's what real fathers do." When it came time for Sarah to leave with the tribe for her period of learning, Jake stood in the pre-dawn darkness, watching her pack. "I'll come back," she said. "I don't know when, and I don't know what I'll have decided about my future, but I'll come back to tell you face to face." Jake pulled her into one last embrace. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. Prouder than I've ever been of anything in my life. Whatever you choose, wherever you go, remember that you are loved beyond measure." And then she was gone, riding out of the valley with many horses and a small group of warriors. The months that followed were the longest of Jake's life. Apache visitors still came occasionally, bringing news that Sarah was well and learning much, but they offered no details about her state of mind. Winter came early that year. Jake was chopping wood when he heard the hoofbeats, a single rider approaching. His heart hammered as he walked around to the front of the cabin. Sarah sat astride a paint horse he didn't recognize, but there was no mistaking her silhouette. She was different, though, changed in ways that went deeper than the traditional Apache clothing she wore. She looked older, more self-possessed. "Hello, Papa," she said, sliding down from her horse. Jake opened his arms, and she ran into them without hesitation. But when they separated, Jake could see the weight of decision in her eyes. "You've decided," he said. Sarah nodded. They sat on the porch as the sun set, and Sarah told him about her months with the tribe, about the things she had learned and the people she had come to know. "They offered me a place," she said finally. "A real place, not just as the half-breed child they were protecting, but as a full member of the tribe. I could marry within the people, raise my children to know their heritage." Jake felt his heart sink. That sounds like an honor. It is, Sarah agreed, but it's not what I want. Jake looked at her sharply, hope flickering to life. I realized something during my time with them, Sarah continued. I realized that I don't have to choose between worlds. I can live in both, be a bridge between them. There's going to be a lot of pain and confusion in the years ahead as our peoples learn to live together. Maybe someone like me can help make that transition easier. She turned to face him fully. I want to come home, Papa. I want to help you build something here, a place where people can come to understand each other, instead of just fighting. I want to use what you taught me and what the tribe taught me to create something new. Jake felt tears stream down his cheeks. You want to stay? I want to stay, Sarah confirmed, if you'll have me. I know the path I'm choosing won't be easy, but I can't think of anywhere else I'd rather make my stand, or anyone else I'd rather have beside me when I do it. Jake pulled her into another fierce embrace. I'll have you, for as long as you want to stay, for whatever battles you want to fight, I'll have you. Indeed. As the stars emerged in the clear desert sky, father and daughter sat together on the porch of their home, planning a future that would honor all the worlds that had shaped them. Sarah had chosen her path freely, with full knowledge of what she was accepting and what she was giving up. In the years to come, their small ranch would indeed become a bridge between worlds, a place where Apache and Mexican and Anglo could meet on neutral ground. Sarah would use her unique position to prevent conflicts, heal old wounds, and help her people navigate the treacherous waters of a changing world. But that night, as the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, they were simply a father and daughter who had found each other again, grateful for the gift of family and the promise of tomorrow. The desert held them in its vast embrace, a silent witness to the truth that love could indeed transcend any boundary, if hearts were brave enough to let it.